Kavanaugh spoke. She had 90 seconds before Eli Brandt bled out on the cold concrete of a loading dock. And the only people close enough to help were the ones tied to the company that had fired her 6 hours earlier. Not to feed her, Nans. Cora Maddox knelt in a spreading dark slick that the sodium lights turned the color of motor oil, and she pressed both hands down hard into a man's thigh while somewhere above her, on. 2 more men with rifles argued in clipped voices about a vehicle that wasn't coming fast enough. Man Connern, Waged. She had walked out of Argent Defense Systems that night with a cardboard box of her own things, and the certainty that 11 years of her life had been crossed out like a line in a ledger, and told she was difficult. She had been told she was a liability, and now a stranger's pulse was thinning under her fingers, and the math of his survival had nothing to do with any of the words they'd used about her in that conference room. If this one stays with you the way I think it will, stay with me to the end. Like the video, and tell me in the comments what town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story carries. All right, here's how it happened. Good men. The last person who said anything kind to Cora at Argent was a 61-year-old line tech named Sal Petrosky, who'd worked the press bay for 26 years and had a bad knee he refused to get looked at. She found him at his station near the end of her final shift, running stress checks on a batch of ceramic strike plates, and he glanced up at the box under her arm and didn't pretend not to understand. It, he said. They actually did it. They actually did it. His caliper. He had hands like worn leather, and he wiped them slowly on a rag that was past helping. You know what gets me, he said. I've been here since before half these managers were born. In all that time, you're the only inspector who ever walked the floor and actually looked at a man when he talked to her. The rest of them look at the clipboard. They look at the screen. You looked at people. Ganshin. He shook his head. They're gonna miss you, and they don't even know it yet. Sultan to answer that. She didn't trust herself to answer that, so she squeezed his shoulder. And he patted her hand once, rough and quick, the way men of his generation did when they meant something they couldn't say. Then she walked the length of the floor one last time, past the racks and the kilns and the test chamber with its scarred steel backing, and she clocked out at 11:40 and went to turn in her badge. Doug Pemberton was waiting in the admin hallway with his arms folded, and an expression he probably thought looked neutral. He was her floor supervisor, the man whose office she'd walked into 40 times in 18 months with reports he never forwarded, and he had the satisfied stillness of someone watching a problem solve itself. Your last check, he said. I'll need the badge and the lanyard. Come on, not. She set the badge on the counter. She'd imagined throwing it. She'd pictured the clatter of it skidding across the linoleum. Imagined it more than once during the long, flat hours of the night. But when the moment came, she just laid it down, and the quiet of that felt more like the truth than any gesture would have. Anything else? She asked. Linda spoke. Something flickered behind his face. He'd braced for a scene. He'd wanted one. Wanted the tears or the shouting that would let him go home, feeling like the reasonable one. She gave him nothing. He said, That's everything. Box. She picked up her box and walked out. A night air, off the river, hit her. The second she pushed through the back door, raw and wet and smelling of cold iron the way. Dunmore Crossing always did in November. Men of rifle spoke. The plant sat in a bend of the river at the bottom of the valley, and the fog came up off the water this time of year, and pooled in the lot like something with weight. She'd parked at the far end and past the loading docks, because the inspectors always got the bad spots. She knew this lot. She knew the cracked seam in the asphalt, by the dumpsters, the flicker in the third light pole, the particular groan the chain link made when the wind came down the valley. She'd spent 11 years learning a place the way you only learn somewhere you've left pieces of yourself. Yamin spoke. She was maybe 40 feet from her car when the headlights came on. Two vehicles, dark, no markings blocking the lot mouth, doors opening, and men, four of them, moving with the kind of economy that wasn't security guard economy, fanning out without hurry, one of them already saying her name. Maddox. She stopped. Her box was still in her arms. Who's asking? Pied. We need you to come with us. There isn't a lot of time. And that was the moment everything she thought, she understood about her own life started to come apart, because the man who'd said it wasn't reading off anything. He knew her name without checking. He knew where she parked. It meant what happened next, Hyde, happened fast, and she only assembled it properly later. There was a second set of headlights, coming hard from the service road behind the plant. Somebody else, somebody who hadn't been part of the careful, slow approach. There was a voice she didn't know shouting a warning. A soldier spoke. There was the flat, unmusical sound of gunfire, nothing like the movies, just a series of hard cracks that flattened the air, and the four men dropping and moving and returning it, and Cora down behind a concrete tire stop with her box scattered and her heart slamming. Come on and fight. And then it was over, almost before she understood it had started. The second set of headlights peeling away into the fog, and one of the four men was on the ground on the dock apron, and another was crouched over him, saying his name in a voice that had gone thin. I'm at. Brant, stay with me. And moving before she'd decided to. That was the thing about it. She didn't decide. The body just went, the way it had gone for her in a dozen wrecks on Dark County roads in the years she'd run with the Dunmore volunteer ambulance crew in her 20s, before the plant, before any of it. She dropped beside the downed man and took one look, and her hands knew the shape of the problem. High in the thigh, dark blood coming steady and fast, too fast, the kind of fast that meant the round had found the artery. I need pressure right here, hard, both hands, she said, and she was already doing it, leaning her whole weight down. You, belt, off, now. I need it above this, high as it'll go. The crouching man hesitated half a second and then obeyed her like she outranked him. Tighter. I don't care if it hurts him. Tighter. He doesn't feel it. He's not feeling much of anything. That's the problem. Brant was gray and slick with sweat, and his eyes were doing the slow drift she hated. She talked to him the whole time. Not because it did anything clinical, but because a voice gave a person something to hold. She told him his crew was right there. She told him the bleeding was slowing, which it was. Finally, under the belt and her hands, she told him he was not going to die in a parking lot in Pennsylvania over something this stupid, and somewhere in there a thread of color came back into his face, and his eyes found hers and stayed. When that was when she heard the helicopter. Imager spoke. It came up the valley low and loud, and the fog tore apart under it, and it set down on the flat gravel past the docks in a storm of grit. And the man who'd first said her name, older than the others, pale-eyed, in night spoke, moving with the calm of someone who'd had bad nights before, came back across the apron and looked down at her hands buried in his man's leg, and at the steadiness she hadn't lost. And something in his face shifted. Gratitude exactly. Recalibration. The look of a man revising an estimate. Brant, onto the aircraft on a litter, and the pale-eyed man stayed with her on the gravel while it lifted off, and he didn't say he was sorry. She'd half expected it, some smoothing over. Some I apologize for how this went. He didn't offer it. He just watched her wipe her hands on her own jeans and waited until the rotor noise dropped enough to talk. Pruitt, he said. Defense Criminal Investigative Service. The men who just came at us weren't ours. I gathered that. Good. Your man Brant would be dead. I want that on the record between us before anything else. He studied her. You've done that before. A long time ago. Different life. She looked at the blood on her hands, black under the lights. Now you tell me why you knew my name and where I park. He didn't dodge it, which she'd remember later as the first thing that made her halfway trust him. Because for the last several months, he said, you've been the only person inside that building, doing the job we've been trying to do from the outside. And tonight, you've been filing reports against. Decided you'd become a problem worth solving permanently. We were here to get to you first. We were a few minutes late. And a sentence like that is that it doesn't land all at once. It lands in layers. First the words, then the shape under the words, manager. She stood there in the cold, with the fog closing back over the river, and felt the story she'd been telling herself about her own life, that she'd burned out, that she'd had bad luck with managers, that she was simply too stubborn for her own good, and had finally pushed the wrong person. Felt all of it start to peel away from something harder underneath. Because if there was a reason they'd wanted her gone, then there was a thing she'd been standing next to without seeing it. And whatever it was, it had been worth killing a woman in a parking lot to keep buried. A motel 2 towns over. 2 towns over, a long, low place off the state route with a flickering vacancy sign. And in a room with the curtains taped shut, a second agent showed her what her reports had actually been about. A soldier spoke. Her name was Renee Salazar, and she had a laptop and a patience that told Cora she'd done this kind of briefing before with people who weren't ready to hear it. Document Cora recognized in her bones. A lot certification sheet. The same format she'd filled out hundreds of times in her first year at Argent made dissension to it. Back when she still believed the paperwork side of a defense plant could be made honest if you just applied enough attention to it. Me what you're looking at, Salazar said. Test cert. Ballistic. This is the chamber data. Velocity in, whether the plate stopped the round, partial penetration, complete penetration. Cora's eyes moved down the columns and stopped. These numbers are wrong. How? Schnolger spoke. This lot. The pass rate's reported at 98%. But look at the raw entries. There's a whole block here that reads as complete penetrations, and they've been recoded as test fixture errors and dropped from the count. You can't drop those. A complete penetration on a strike plate is the whole point. That's a plate that doesn't stop the bullet. It's rated to stop. She looked up. Somebody's cooking the certs. Every lot you flagged? Salazar said quietly. Every single one you wrote up over the last 18 months. They were real. The plates were failing the test, and someone above you was editing the record before it left the building. Your reports were being intercepted at the supervisor level and shredded. Pemberton. The name arrived without drama. Just a piece dropping into a slot in a shape she'd been staring at for a year and a half. He'd taken every report and nodded and said he'd escalate it. He never escalated anything. Come on, Nonovan. Where were the plates going? Cora said, though she already knew the way you know the floor's still there before you step on it. Gar swiped to the next document, a shipping manifest. Destination codes that weren't civilian. Procurement contracts. Some of these let's ship to a primary that supplies forward units. Some went to a National Guard distribution hub. The plates that failed your line went out the door, rated for threats they could not stop, and they went onto the backs of people who were trusting a number on a certificate. Condors. Cora sat down on the edge of the bed. She had to. Her brother Danny had worn plates like that. 2 tours. He'd come home with a tremor in his left hand he still didn't talk about, but he'd come home. And every time she'd run a strike plate in that test chamber for 11 years, she had somewhere underneath been running it for him. For somebody's Danny. How long, she said. We need you for. That's the part we need you for, Pruitt said from the corner. Because it's bigger than Argent, and it's older than you think. It's told her over the next 2 hours, rearranged the architecture of everything. Argent defense systems had been falsifying ballistic certifications for the better part of a decade. The fraud wasn't sloppiness. It was a machine. The plates that failed got recoded and shipped, the difference between the cost of making them right and the price of selling them as right got skimmed and laundered through a string of shell distributors registered across 3 states, and the savings flowed upward into very specific pockets. Pemberton was a gate, not a planner. The planning lived higher. None. The man who runs it day to day is Gerald Pike, Salazar said, VP of Operations. He's the one who built the recoding protocol. Above him, the money moves through a man named Owen Dre, comptroller on paper, a launderer in practice. We've got Dre's signature on 112 transactions over a 31-month window, and that's before we finish the full chain. And above Dre, Nimbusby. Pruitt and Salazar exchanged the kind of look that was its own answer. Above Dre. Pruitt said, is the reason this has survived as long as it has, and the reason no one's been able to touch it. We'll get there. Right now, I need you to understand something. I think you've spent 18 months believing a version of this, where you're the one who failed. He came over and crouched so they were level. You didn't get fired because you were difficult, Maddox. You got fired because you were good. Caught. You kept catching the thing they a great deal of money to make sure nobody caught. The only mistake you made was being right out loud. She sat with that for a while, sighed. Outside, a truck went by on the state route and faded. 11 years. Every search she'd ever questioned, every time she'd been told she was too rigid, too literal, didn't understand the business pressures. Needed to be more of a team player. She'd half believed it. She'd lain awake, believing it. And then Munoz spoke. And the whole time the wrongness had been real, and the people receiving her reports had been actively working to make it not real. And the failure she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest had never been hers. What do you need me to do? She said. And above Dre was a congressman named Earl Sutton. Not women spoke. She learned that 2 days later, in a different room, when Salazar finally turned the laptop and showed her a document 9 years old. It was a procurement waiver, a sign-off that had killed an earlier inquiry into ballistic certification fraud at a sister plant before Argent ever opened its doors. Mulger spoke. The original whistleblower's report had been routed up the chain and then at a specific desk, quietly waived, reclassified as a documentation discrepancy, and buried. The signature at the bottom belonged to a mid-level defense procurement official who, in the years since, had run for office on a reputation for grilling defense contractors in public hearings, and had won and had risen, and now sat on the very subcommittee that oversaw the programs his old signature had protected. 3 terms, Salazar said, known for being tough on contractors, which I now understand to be the performance of a man who needs to be seen asking hard questions so that nobody thinks to ask any hard questions about him. Goodness. Cora looked at the name on the page. Earl Sutton. He signed the original waiver. And now he chairs oversight. Then he's protected. Soldiers. He's protected as long as the only thing we have is the current case, Salazar said. Pike, Dre, the Argent fraud. Sutton can survive all of it. He'll call it a rogue contractor. He'll say the system worked, that bad actors were caught. He'll use his committee position to slow the investigation from widening past Argent, and he'll do it from behind the language of accountability. She tapped the 9-year-old document into common. Unless we can show that the same fraud ran through his hands before, then a soldier spoke. 1 instance is a contractor cutting corners. 2 instances 9 years apart with his signature on the suppression of the first. That's a pattern. A pattern is a person. And there's only one way to prove the first instance was real. The original whistleblower. Argent. Her name is Lucia Ferraro. She filed 3 reports at the sister plant a decade ago, each one more detailed than the last, because she thought the problem was that they didn't believe her. After the 3rd one, guy. She was terminated for cause, the cause being fabricated, and the record was sealed in a way that made her unemployable in the industry. We have spent 2 weeks trying to find her. We found her yesterday. Lazar slid a piece of paper across. She has not spoken to anyone official in 9 years. She has every reason not to start now. But your reports and hers side by side are the spine of this whole thing. Without her, Sutton walks. Not performing, Bazarin. Cora called Lucia Ferraro that night, sitting on the floor with her back against the foot of the bed, because a chair felt too formal for what she was about to do, which was reach across 9 years and a sealed record, and ask a stranger to bleed for her again. Not the phone rang 4 times. Hello? A woman's voice, cautious, low. In the background, faintly, a television, and then it muted. Your name is Cora Maddox, she said. I was a ballistic inspector at Argent Defense in Dunmore Crossing until 6 days ago when they fired me and then tried to kill me. 9 years ago, any of this made. You filed reports about plates that weren't stopping what they were supposed to stop, and somebody buried you to protect it. I have the documentation that proves you were right about every word. Come on, I'd like to talk to you about what we can do with it. Men? The silence on the line had a texture to it. She could hear the woman breathing. How did you find me? Ferraro said finally. The way they found me, Cora said. I kept writing the truth down until somebody important enough noticed. Amid. A sound came down the line that might have been a laugh and might have been the start of something else. You said we. Ahmed. I did. What do you mean? What does that mean? Ahmed. It means you're not doing this by yourself, Cora said. I'm not either. Neither of us ever should have been. They talked for 2.5 hours. Cora learned that Lucia Ferraro was 40 now, that she'd left the defense industry entirely, and worked as a lab tech at a community college named Nina, who was 8 and asleep down the hall, which gave the whole call a hushed, careful quality. The soldier spoke. 2 women keeping their voices down over a thing that should have been shouted from a rooftop. She learned that Ferraro had spent 9 years certain she'd failed. A man that she should have pushed harder, gathered more, been smarter about it. That the shame of it had followed her into every job since. Matt filed 3 reports, Ferraro said. I thought if I just gave them enough data, enough specifics, they'd have to act. I did everything by the book, and the book didn't save me. I filed 51, Cora said. In 18 months. I thought the same thing. If I'm just thorough enough, just careful enough, they'll have to listen. 1. A pause. Did it work? It worked differently than I meant it to, Cora said, but yeah, it's working. Look at her, the shape of it. The parking lot. Brandt, Pruitt, and Salazar. Pike, Dre. And then Sutton's name in a 9-year-old waiver, and what that meant, and what closing the pattern would take. And then Rifles spoke. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. When Ferraro spoke again, her voice was very controlled, the kind of control that costs something. Smoke. He signed the order that ended my career, she said, and now he sits in judgment over the whole industry. That is as modded. Her was born the year after I left, Ferraro said. I left because there was no path forward, and my record was poisoned, and I'd convinced myself I'd done it wrong. I've spent 9 years telling myself that if I'd just stayed, She stopped. Everything right, Cora said. They were bigger than what one person could push against alone. That's not your failure. That's how they built it. That's the design. 9 years. Knowing that doesn't give me back the 9 years. Man. No, Cora said. It doesn't. She didn't try to make it softer than it was. Some things didn't get softer just because you finally understood them. but it can mean the next nurse, the next inspector, and a soldier spoke. The next person who notices something wrong on a Tuesday and decides to write it down. It can mean they don't have to do it alone in the dark for 9 years before anyone believes them. It doesn't fix what happened to you. It closes the pattern. Without you, Sutton says the original case was a clerical mix-up made by a junior official. With you, it's the first link in a documented chain. It's the thing he can't talk his way around. Steadied. The breathing on the line steadied. Tell me what you need, Lucia Ferraro said. And it moved fast after that. The way these things do once the last piece is in place. There was a window. Pruitt said it plainly. Maybe 48 hours. Before Sutton's staff connected the old record to the current case and brought it to him, and he started using everything he had to slow it down. They had to lock the evidence chain before that happened. The monster soldier spoke. The hardest part fell to Cora, because she was the only one who could walk into Argent without setting off an alarm. Pike kept the master recoding logs on a machine in the executive suite. Air-gapped, not on any network they could reach from outside. They needed the physical drive or images of what was on it, and they needed it before Pike understood the warehouse end of his operation had been compromised. Get in. On a Saturday morning, when the floor was skeleton-crewed and the admin wing was empty, on the pretext of returning equipment and signing exit paperwork that HR had genuinely, conveniently, failed to finish. She walked the halls she'd walked 10,000 times. She knew which doors stuck and which security cameras pointed where and which one near the executive suite had been dead for 2 years because nobody wanted to pay to fix it. Spoke. She got into Pike's outer office. She got the drive out of the dock on the credenza machine, and the 3 documents that were sitting out on his desk. Financial transfer records. Careless. Spoke. The carelessness of a man who'd never once imagined being caught. And she photographed them where they lay, the way Pruitt had told her, documenting position before touching anything. In outer gear, her phone uploaded each shot to the cloud automatically the instant she took it. She'd set that up years ago because she kept losing photos when her old phone died on her. The most ordinary decision a person could make, and it turned out to be the one that mattered, because she was 3 photographs in when Gerald Pike walked into his own office and found her standing at his desk, and alone. There was a man with him. Big, quiet, the kind of quiet that came with a weapon under a jacket. And the weapon came out, and for a long-stretched moment, the only sound in the room was the building's heating system ticking in the walls. Put the phone down, Maddox, Pike said. He was very calm, the affable calm she'd always found unsettling in him, the calm of a locked door with a welcome mat in front of it. Mate. You should know, Cora said, and she was surprised her voice held that everything on this phone is already off it. It uploaded the second I took it, before you walked in. Wiping this device doesn't get you anything. It's already gone. Onions in the building. She watched him do the math. She watched the affability drain out and something colder come up underneath. And she watched the big man's eyes flick to Pike for a decision. And she watched Pike arrive, the way people with something to lose arrive. At the understanding that the geometry had already shifted, and there was no version of the next 60 seconds that helped him. There were federal agents in the building, there had been. Since before she walked in, Pruitt had timed it that way, with her in the open as the thing that drew Pike out of cover. The big man heard the corridor outside fill with the specific loud quiet of multiple agencies converging, and he set the weapon on the desk, slowly, grip first, the way professionals did when the math was done. And Cora exhaled. It wasn't dramatic. It was just her body letting go of something it had been holding for 11 years. And that day happened around her. Not so if he spoke. Pike walked out of his own office 20 minutes later, with 2 agents flanking him and the stunned look of a man whose entire plan had been built around a morning that no longer existed. Owen Dre was picked up at his house before noon. Pemberton tried to delete a folder of intercepted reports and discovered the agents already had a copy, a soldier archive, recovered from the very suppressed archive he thought he'd been so careful about. Spoke, and the drive went into federal custody, and the decryption confirmed what the 9-year-old waiver and Lyja Lucera Ferraro's 3 buried reports, and Cora's 51 rejected. Lots had all been pointing at the whole time. Earl Sutton's name was on the chain. Just the old waiver, current transfers routed carefully, deniably. But there, Hyde filed for a flight to a district event, the morning the warehouse went down. He thought the raid had failed. He had time. He thought to the and he had, Pruitt told her later, about 40 minutes. Them apart for Sutton in a hearing room, which Cora thought afterward was the right place for it. Lucia Ferraro testified. Cora testified. 2 women, 9 years apart, had each been told they were the problem, sat in front of a microphone, and laid the pattern down link by link until there was nothing left. Of the story Sutton had spent a decade building. His committee seat dissolved under him. The companies restructured or folded. The plates already in the field were recalled in a quiet, enormous, expensive operation that the public mostly never heard about. And Cora let herself believe that somewhere a soldier she'd never meet would go home because of a recall notice that traced back to a rejected lot number she'd written down on a Tuesday 18 months before. Muddy first spoke. She didn't get a medal. There was no press conference with her name on it. The settlement she received was real, and she didn't have to think about money for a while, but it didn't balance against 11 years. To make it. You couldn't put a career on one side of a ledger and a consulting fee on the other, and call it even. People had been hurt. Some of them had died in places she'd never see, wearing certificates she'd been overruled on. It was erasable, and she'd stopped needing it to be. What she had instead was something quieter and more durable, and she turned it over in her mind one evening in early spring, standing at the railing of the old iron bridge over the river in Dunmore, crossing with the water, running gray and high with snowmelt below her. And a soldier spoke. She'd spent years believing the work she did either mattered or it didn't, and that whether it mattered was something other people decided. Supervisors, committees, men with the authority to choose which record stood and which got buried. She'd believed that if she did the work right and they ignored it, the failure must be somewhere in her. And she'd been wrong about that the whole time. The work had mattered every single time. Every rejected lot, every report Pemberton shredded. Number day, she'd refused to round up. They'd mattered while they were being ignored. The way a true thing stays true while someone's standing on top of it, trying to keep it down. The fraud had been trying to erase a record for 10 years. It had never once succeeded. It had only ever delayed it, and was the reason. The delay ended, not because she'd been remarkable, not because she'd had some gift, but because she'd noticed what was wrong, and written it down and refused to stop. Because she knew exactly what a failed plate meant on the back of somebody's brother. Not the lesson she'd have chosen. She'd have preferred a version where she was extraordinary in some clear and obvious way. The real lesson was smaller and harder, and it held more weight. That the difference between a thing changing and a thing staying the same was usually just one ordinary person with accurate observations, and the plain stubbornness to keep making them, after everyone had stopped listening, and buzzed against the railing. A message from Salazar. A new flag had come up. A different manufacturer, a different state, body armor, this time for police departments. 2 evidence techs at 2 separate agencies filing the same kind of small discrepancy in the same narrow window. Probably nothing. Probably data entry. probably something else. You're going to want to look at this, Salazar had written. Come in. Cora watched the river a while longer, until the light went soft and gold over the water, and the cold came up off it the way it always did. Lucia Ferraro had called her Sunday. Nina had answered the phone first and asked, in the direct way of 8-year-olds, whether Cora was the lady who'd helped her mom not be sad anymore, and Cora had needed a second before she could answer that one. In her pocket and walked back to her car, which needed an oil change and an inspection she kept putting off. And she got in and didn't look back at the river when the road curved away from it. She was already reading the briefing in her head, already thinking about the next set of numbers that didn't add up. Some stories ended with a medal and a podium, and ended with a woman who'd been told she was ordinary driving toward the next thing that was wrong, having finally understood that ordinary had never been the insult they'd meant it to be. That was the whole of it. That was enough. I keep coming back to the moment Cora Maddox laid that badge on the counter instead of throwing it, because that small, quiet choice tells you everything about why the story ended the way it did. Nothing in her life happened by accident. She's lost 11 years because she refused to round a number up. She nearly lost her life that night in the lot because she'd become inconvenient to powerful people, and every one of those same stubborn habits. The careful notes, the rejected lots, the refusal to look away, is exactly what kept Eli Brandt breathing, what put Gerald Pike in handcuffs, what finally reached a man like Sutton who thought he was untouchable. The cause and the effect were never separate. The thing that got her punished was the same thing that made her dangerous to them in the end. Herman Sicilians. What I want you to take from this isn't that she got lucky. She didn't. She was put in those positions by something she'd been building quietly for years, and I think it comes down to 3 things any of us can choose to grow. Jimena spoke. The first is the plain decency to do right even when no one is watching and no one will thank you. Cora documented those failing plates for 18 months while every report disappeared into Pemberton's desk. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because she knew what a bad plate meant on her own brother's back, and she couldn't make herself pretend otherwise. The second is the kind of clear, patient judgment that lets you see what's actually in front of you. Cora read a falsified test cert and knew instantly which numbers had been moved. Lucia Ferraro spent 9 years thinking she'd failed, until she finally understood she'd been right all along, and the system had simply been bigger than one person standing alone. Seeing a thing clearly, including seeing that the failure was never yours, is its own hard-won skill. Is the sheer grit to keep going after the wall doesn't move. 51 reports, 3 from Ferraro before that. Most people stop at 1. The whole machine was built on the bet that anyone who noticed would eventually get tired, get scared, or get quiet. Cora's only real weapon was that she refused to. So when I watch her drive away from that river toward the next thing that was wrong, I don't see somebody extraordinary. I see somebody ordinary who decided that ordinary was enough. That one honest person with accurate eyes and the patience to keep writing the truth down can shift the weight of something far larger than themselves. And you don't need to be a hero to do that. You need to care, you need to look honestly, and you need to not stop. That's a thing you can practice. That's a thing you can become.